Welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you to Personal Conversations, part of the suite of educational programs which are a benefit for members of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. In the Personal Conversations series, we try to take a deeper look at matters that are in our hearts and minds as Jews and as women. It's about how we each live our lives and come together as community. I'm Vivian Leber, Chair of Women's League's Personal Conversations. I'm on the International Women's League Board and a past chair of Women's League Reads and past president of the BQLI region of Women's League. Co-hosting tonight's program is Fran Hildebrant, who will be the panel moderator. Fran is chair of Mishpacha, the Modern Jewish Family, which is a Women's League program of education and of the education suite. She also is the lead for the Inclusion Initiative of Women's League in collaboration with the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs. Fran is the immediate past president of Central Great Lakes Region. She sits on the International Board of Women's League and is a member of the Torah Fund Cabinet. In a few minutes, I'll introduce you to tonight's four featured speakers for our panel. For tonight's programs is Jewish Women of Color on a Journey Towards Inclusion. Are we there yet? The prior sessions in this series may be replayed from the Women's League website under the Online Programs tab. We are also recording tonight's program. Within a few days, a link to the recording will also be available at the WLCJ.org website. The program will run for about an hour and a half. Karen Belena of Women's League staff is providing technical support. Thank you, Karen. It's now my pleasure to introduce you first to the Women's League International President, Debbie Goldich, for a few words. I hope.
I don't know if she's able to be on. It's Rabbi Wollensfield. I literally actually just ran in from the train too. We were at commencement and she's in transit. So I believe she's not going to be able to come on, but she sends her regards and she's definitely going to be watching.
Okay. Excellent. If she joins us late, let me know. Okay. Later, you just heard from Rabbi Ellen Wollensfield, the executive director of Women's League. You'll hear more from her a little bit later. We're first going to set the stage for tonight's panel by offering some highlights from a key survey and study that an organization, Jews of Color Initiative, had commissioned. It's called Beyond the Count. There it is in the chat box, and it was also sent to everyone after they registered. So it was very interesting, and I'm glad that Rabbi Rivera brought it to our attention. I'm going to read some of the highlights. I'm going to paraphrase. And it's the Jews of Color Initiative is a national organization that seeks racial equality in the Jewish community so that all Jews of color can reach their full potential and belonging as leaders and community members. To achieve those aims, the Jews of Color Initiative developed a research study entitled Beyond the Count, which then commissioned a survey. The first survey was completed and published in 2018, with a second survey released in the fall of 2021. The study's primary aim is to enhance American Jews' understanding of their own racial and ethnic diversity and raise awareness of the lived experience of Jews of color. Another way of putting it, the research aims to correct the long minimized experiences of Jews of color, to amplify their voices, to acknowledge their variety and complexity. One of our panelists, Rabbi Mira Rivera, helped to frame the research project in its early phase. I'm going to condense and paraphrase from the 2021 survey. There were 1,118 people who self-identified as Jews who responded to the survey, and 61 in-depth interviews were conducted. The term Jews of color is acknowledged to be imperfect, but is a useful umbrella term. Jews of color self-identify by racial group or as multiracial, also by national heritage, and also by geographic connections. There are also subcategories for women, transracial, adoptees, and other identities. The demographics of these self-identified Jews demonstrates wide diversity. Here are a few of the study points I'd like to share. The demographics. Almost half of respondents, 45%, selected 2 racial categories for their identity. 64% have at least one Jewish parent. 40% have converted as either adults or been converted as minors. Half were raised Jewish. Another 16% were raised as Jewish and something else. 42% identified as belonging to Ashkenaz Jewry. 60% are or at some point were active in a synagogue or a Jewish organization. The respondents cited their powerful connections to ritual, family, values, and tradition, and vary greatly in their practices. Many of them integrating customs from their different aspects of themselves, racially, ethnically, and religiously, and a deep sense of themselves as Jews. In terms of their values being a driver of their identity, 76% rated as very important. They're working for justice and equality. The next most important values were passing on their Jewish identity and honoring their parents and ancestors. Now, here's what gets really interesting for the purposes of tonight's discussion. Respondents reported that they felt scrutinized because of their race in some settings and scrutinized as Jews in other settings. They described how being marginalized gives them heightened awareness of how they're seen by others. They had encountered anti-Semitism and unwelcome questions about the Israel-Palestinian conflict and about their religious identity. Some who've been to Israel felt that Jews of color living in Israel found it easier than in the US, yet others experienced racism also in Israel. They described racist and discriminatory treatment at times by synagogues and schools and other Jewish organizations. At times they were ignored or showered with unwelcome attention. Some forms of bias are subtle. For example, someone would appear to be friendly only to explain a Jewish custom to them on the assumption that they must be ignorant of Jewish customs, or they had been asked intrusive questions about how they became Jewish. 54% said that there was too little diversity in their own Jewish communities, and some have been proactively trying to transform their communities. Yet 51% did feel some sense of belonging among other Jews. At the same time, 46% welcome opportunities to talk with Jews of color about their experiences, holding separate gatherings. That gives them a greater sense of healing and belonging. 65% agreed that with the statement that American Jewish leaders are not addressing racism in their own communities, nor diversifying their core of leaders. While acknowledging that white Jewish groups are waking up to institutional racism, many are skeptical of what is perceived as Jewish leaders focus on more superficial change. So the study, it is hoped, will be a catalyst pushing American Jewry to confront individual and collective roles in perpetuating racial structures and thereby hopefully empowering leaders to create improved experiences for all. There are other important findings and recommendations, but I'll leave it there, and you may find that link in the chat box or in other ways at the Jews of Color Initiative website. So with that, I would like everyone to meet our presenters. Fran and I will introduce them in taking turns. So first, I would like to introduce Rabbi Mira Rivera. Welcome. Rabbi Rivera, growing up in Michigan, the child of immigrant parents from the Philippines, she loved the arts. She danced for the Martha Graham Dance Company and Ensemble and completed a BFA degree in film at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. She also has been an educator in both Jewish institutions and New York City public schools. On becoming a rabbi, ordained in 2015, she was the first Filipino American graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary. She went on to serve as a chaplain residency at Mount Sinai Hospital and in community fellowships. She then joined Kehilat Romemu, a congregation in New York City, as a fellow. She continues to serve at Romemu as associate rabbi and board certified chaplain. In addition, she serves as rabbi and mentor at Amud, the Jews of Color Torah Academy. Its mission is to empower Jews of color through education and with access to their distinct traditions while offering them community and support. She additionally is co-chair of the Rabbinical Council for Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. She has co-founded Harlem Havruta, a space for Jews of color and their allies, in partnership with St. Mary's Episcopal Church. She is an alumnus of Bend the Ark's Sela cohort, 15 Jews of color. Rabbi Rivera has contributed to the development of that survey project Beyond the Count. We are honored to welcome you, Rabbi Rivera, and we'll hear from you soon. But next, Fran would like to introduce Cantor
Annelise Ocanto-Romo serves as the Chazan at Ohev Shalom of Bucks County, a congregation just outside Philadelphia. She was born in Boston and has lived in many places during her childhood, including Caracas, Venezuela, Gainesville, Florida, and finally settling in Omaha, Nebraska, where she lived through college. She received a bachelor's degree in elementary education, a minor in vocal performance, and a specialization in English as a second language from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. While an undergrad, she taught in the Omaha Public Schools, taught at her synagogue's religious school, and was an adult English language learners educator for the Omaha Literacy Center. To Manhattan for graduate school, earning a master's degree in sacred music and ordination from the H.L. Miller Cantorial School at the Jewish Theological Seminary. She also completed 1 unit of clinical pastoral education through the Center for Pastoral Care at JTS. While in cantorial school, she continued to teach in religious schools in Manhattan and Brooklyn, tutoring B'nai Mitzvah students, as well as serving as cantor and cantorial intern in the Dominican Republic, Youngstown, Ohio, and Wyckoff, New Jersey. Upon graduation, Rabbi Ocanto-Romo became the Chazan at Beth Israel in Worcester, Massachusetts, for 3 years prior to joining Ohev Shalom. Currently, Cantor Ocanto-Romo is working towards her graduate degree in Jewish education with a track in Jewish special education. She's a member of the Conservative Movement's Cantors Assembly. Cantor Ocanto-Romo and her husband, Alessandro, is a professional photographer, and their 2 sons live in Warrington, Pennsylvania. We welcome Cantor Ocanto-Romo's participation and perspective to tonight's program. And now, Edith Magruder is a member of Congregation Kol Shalom in Annapolis, Maryland. She's an active member of the synagogue and sisterhood affiliate, as well as Women's League. Edith is a retired special education teacher. She attended Bowie State Teachers College, now called Bowie State University in Bowie, Maryland. And I'm hoping, Edith, that I'm pronouncing it Bowie is correct, and you'll let me know later if I am wrong. While she was in college, she majored in elementary education. 3 years later, she became certified in special education. She then earned a master's degree in adult and continuing education from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Edith taught in the Anne Arundel County Public Schools for 37.3 years as a learning disabilities teacher. Edith understands about life's challenges. She has been widowed twice. Her first husband died when she was young, leaving her with a daughter to raise as a single working mother. Then she was fortunate in meeting another life partner, her husband, Frank, of blessed memory. Together, they raised 4 children, 3 daughters and a son, who have given her 8 grandchildren. Edith was already attending Congregation Kol Shalom when she experienced a pivotal moment that changed her life. She was visiting Valley Beth Israel in Sun Valley, California, when she became aware of what it meant to be counted. In Edith's own words, and I quote, "The rabbi stopped the service when my daughter and I entered to ask if we were converted because they lacked dominion. When I returned to Annapolis, I immediately let Rabbi Paul know that I was ready to be counted." On June 17, 2015, Edith's conversion took place at Addis Israel in Washington, D.C. Since then, she has continued to be an involved member of Congregation Kol Shalom in both synagogue and sisterhood, as well as Women's League. Besides participating in Makom B'Yachad, Edith is the financial secretary for Seaboard Region. We welcome Edith's participation and perspective to tonight's program. And now, Vivian.
Okay, our 4th panelist is Jerilynn Payne. I know these biographies are long, but they're each so fascinating and important for us to understand each woman's path and her accomplishments. It's a pleasure to hear these. Jerilynn Payne is a student of Judaism and Hebrew as she prepares for her presentation before the Bet Din and immersion in the mikveh in June next month. She attends Beth Shalom congregation in Columbia, Maryland, and feels privileged to have studied there under Rabbi Susan Grossman, noting that Rabbi Grossman, soon to become Rabbi Emeritus, had been one of the pioneers in advancing women's roles and rights in conservative Judaism. Jerilynn actively participates in her sisterhood and in Women's League programs. She also has been serving on the joint WLCJ Men's Federation Inclusion Initiative. A native of Baltimore, Jerilynn grew up in an extended family of social activists, ministers, lawyers, and public servants. She witnessed firsthand the negative effects of racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, religious intolerance, and other wrongs. And she truly wants to see more concrete action taken to attain equity, diversity, and inclusion. Jerilynn has put her many talents to work over the course of several careers and in volunteer work. First attending preparatory schools in music, she then attended Shenandoah College and Conservatory of Music, now Shenandoah University, as a bassoonist, and she received a Bachelor of Music Therapy degree. She took a second educational pathway to study fire science and technology, emergency medical services, and a host of programs at the National Fire Academy. Thirdly, she received a master's degree with specialization in aging at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. In the ensuing decades, Jerilynn has served as a musician, a music therapist, field representative for not-for-profit organizations, educator for secondary and post-secondary students, hospital critical care technician, firefighter, EMS supervisor, fire academy instructor, and social worker. And she's a lifelong volunteer, including having supported groups for teenage parents, support groups for people with dementia, her housing advocacy, her right to vote advocacy, helping disaster services and public safety. Also volunteer firefighting and EMS as a volunteer, and programming naturalization ceremonies and military and veteran support programs. There's a lot here. Jerilynn celebrates the rich diversity within the Tribe of Jewish People organizations and synagogues. Well, we are very impressed with each of you, and thank you. I now turn the program back to Fran.
Thanks, Vivian. And I agree with what you've said about what amazing panelists we have. Good evening and welcome. So happy to see all of you and spend this time together. As Vivian said, I'll be your moderator. As you know, this evening, we present 4 women of color from diverse backgrounds whose experiences with Judaism in all of its religious, intellectual, and cultural aspects will be sure to educate and enlighten us. Using selected findings from the Beyond the Count survey as a reference, each of our panelists will have opportunities to speak about her individual journey toward inclusion. Please remember that while each woman is a conservative Jewish woman, they are not intended to be representatives of everyone who is a Jewish woman or a Jewish woman of color. We've asked our participants to speak from personal experience and share personal opinions. We hope this will be an opportunity for us to walk in another person's pair of shoes and develop insight and information we can take back to our own communities to implement positive change. This is about faith, friendship, and what we can do to actively promote inclusion in our spiritual communities. A few housekeeping items. Please send your questions to Vivian, who will be monitoring the chat. But rather than sending them to everyone, send them to her privately. Time permitting, she will ask as many as possible at the end. And you can direct the questions to a specific panelist or to more than one panelist when you send it to Vivian. We have an interesting set of questions. Some of them will be directed at all of the panel members, and some will be addressed to specific panelists. Regardless, each panelist will have about 2 to 3 minutes to respond to each question. I'll keep time. If we were all sitting in the same room, I would be raising my hand at the 2.5 mark like this. Instead, I will still raise my hand on my Zoom square and wave to indicate we're at 2.5 minutes. And if we go past 3, then I will try to gently say something, at the end of a sentence so that that panelist will know that she needs to wrap up. In this way, the panelist will have time to finish her thought, and hopefully I won't be distracting to anyone as I do it. My intent is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. And even though, of course, we would all be willing to stay till 10 o'clock, that's just not possible tonight. So we're trying to keep track of the time in a tactful way. So at this point, Karen is going to bring us up on the screen together. And no, this is not Hollywood Squares, and so we're waiting. Okay, we're still waiting for Jerilynn. Okay, now we're set. So, question number 1. And if I raise my hand like this just in advance, can you all see that? Wonderful. And you'll want to unmute at least, and I'll try to let you know if the question is directed at one or all of you. So the first question is for Rabbi Rivera and Cantor Ocanto-Romo. What motivated you to pursue your present position as clergy and then to attain your current multifaceted roles? And let's start with Rabbi Rivera. Would you speak first? And then Cantor, you can go right in when she finishes, or if I have to wave. Rabbi?
Everyone. I started people ask, like, when did you start? When did you start activism, or when did you start getting drawn to mysticism or spiritual life or communal worship? It's just one of those things that is there. It was something that it was, I would say, like a kabbalah that was intrinsic in growing up. I was raised by my grandmother, and although I was born in Detroit, my family saw it best, a single child, an only child, to grow up in the Philippines, where we had a lot of cousins and there was land and I would not be a latchkey kid. Right. So really, it was the example of my elders, my grandmother in particular. And also, I would say that I was drawn to spiritual seeking because I grew up without my parents. Right. So that was like a real, it was a gaping wound that, could not really be healed by the phone calls or the occasional trips to the United States. So I really was, drawn to spirituality. But early on in school, I learned about meditation. I learned about yoga. And so at an early age, I started to practice. But during that time, I wasn't really conscious about it, but I heard about Jews. It was like something that was talked about in my family. And if my grandmother would do certain something, people would say, "Oh, she's doing that, because she's Judío." So the word Judío in Spanish means Jew, and the Philippines is the only country in Asia that was colonized by the Philippines, and we share the same history as Latin and South America. So there it is. So it's about family circumstances. It's about this lingering thing about Jews around in my family, and then also my own inclination. And I pass this to Cantor Annelise.
Interesting. Thank you. Cantor?
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Rabbi Mira. So my pursuit of being a Cantor, and I apologize, I noticed that I'm lagging, so I might have to sign on from my cell phone because that's the only other device I have in a minute, but I hope you guys can hear me okay. Okay.
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, there we go. So I come from two parents, one of which is a Jew by choice. Both of my parents are from Venezuela, and my father is what I call a comeback Jew, in the sense that when he's the oldest of 9 children, and my grandmother had Jewish roots, and she was aware of her Jewishness, but was not raised as such. Her parents died at a very young age. She was raised by these wonderful Gentile, non-Jewish people. And so when my father was born, and as he was growing up, my grandmother told him that, in fact, you have Jewish roots, and this is something you, as a child, as an adult, however you decide to, should pursue on your own. My grandfather was a communist, very anti-religion, so it wasn't something that my grandmother could nurture in my father, but my father was inquisitive enough to go on this journey. So fast forward to age 28, about a year and a half after I was born, and my father decided to fully go and convert, circumcision, the whole 9, outside of his own practicing. And as I was growing up, I never really saw the connection between Judaism and being Latinx. They were both very strong identities in myself, but not connected to each other because I did not see those identities illustrated in my Jewish upbringing. But Judaism has been my life since as young as 3 years old. So I was always engaged in synagogue life because, actually, not just because my father, because my mother, being a Jew by choice, I assumed that Jews were literally one huge family, not Reform, not Constructionist, conservative, renewal. They were just, and my mom used to, in her own learning, used to take my brother and I to all these different places, Hillel, Renewal, Congregation, and I assumed Jews are all like that. So in any case, fast forward, my mom being one of my biggest cheerleaders, as the bio mentioned, I was an educator first, and I grew up in the synagogue, and I had cantors, one of which was an Argentinian cantor, who nurtured my love of education and music. And it kind of happened for lack of a better term. It just kind of happened that I came upon the cantorial world, and it seemed like a natural fit.
Thank you very much. Again, learning a lot, interesting stories. Thank you. So now we're going to turn to Edith and Jerilynn, and we'll start with Edith. In the Jews of Color study, many of those surveyed or interviewed in person described how they developed their sense of Jewishness and expressed their Jewish identity. Some expressed their Jewish through activities, education, or as a volunteer for a synagogue or Jewish organization. We'd like to hear how you have grown into your sense of Judaism and expression of your Jewish identity.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this forum. I grew up as a Christian, and I believe that I was very sincere at probably in my 30s. I left the church that I grew up in and began to pursue non-denominational religion, which served me very well for a while. And it was there that I met a young pastor that seemed very firm in his explanations and teachings from the Bible. And that young man came to service one morning. We had been in his service, I guess, a few years. And he came in one morning and he said, I will no longer be preaching on Sunday. From today on, I will be worshiping on Shabbat, which was Saturday. And that was my introduction. And of course, it split the denomination. Half of them, I guess there wasn't a count, but a lot of people left and a lot of people stayed with him. And that wasn't the end, though. He left the area, so I moved with another group that we had at least one time had services with. And following that, I was there when my sister became very ill, and I needed to be closer to the hospital. So that was what brought me to search the synagogues in Anne Arundel County. And I did not want to travel so far, but I ended up at Kol Shalom in Annapolis and was very well received. I called first and the rabbi answered the phone. So that was quite surprising, but he was very welcoming. And when I entered the doors, at least I knew the rabbi. So that was comfortable for me. And there, I've skipped a lot of steps, but it's been ongoing ever since. There was an announcement for a meeting with the Women's League, which I attended a meeting, and they just surrounded me with attention, and it's been that way ever since.
Thank you. Jerilynn? You have to unmute.
There you go. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, give me some love. You know, I'm a little nervous. It's all good, though. So basically, you're asking me how do I express my Jewishness through activities? Let me tell you, I come from a family with a lot of ministers and lawyers. Okay, so you know, that could be quite interesting at times Unfortunately, many of them are blessed memories now, but we still have quite a few ministers in the family. I grew up in my grandfather's church as a Baptist. He was a Baptist minister in Baltimore, probably in today's terms, probably known as a mega church, because in the 50s and 60s, there were like 1,400 people. So it was a very well-known church. But I was always as my mother said, always my grandfather's consciousness when it came to certain things. I was the child, I'm going to go and help that person on the street, no matter how I look or how pretty I am. I'm going to do certain things anyway. So I think in terms of activism, this kind of is in alignment with Judaism, that I'm going to try to help the world in different ways to make it better, even if I stand alone. So I think that was like early on in my life. But the other thing is, as a musician, I was blessed to have been exposed to classical music very early in my life. I was a bassoonist at one time and thought I would be a professional bassoonist at one time. But I also was blessed early on to be able to make some money because I could sight read. So I ended up very early in exposed to various religions, where I would go and sight read music for whatever. So that exposed I was exposed to multiple religions. But it wasn't until I wanted to learn more about world religions, and I was in a class for 9 months, and during the month of November was a focus on Judaism. And unfortunately, my mother became sick and ultimately died. And I missed that. And I really wanted to learn more, to attend services. We were doing all sorts of things. So I asked one of the congregants that I knew who attended Beth Shalom if I could come and attend services with her. And of course, she said yes. Moving fast forward, now I am a COVID convert, okay? A lot of negative things, but that really allowed me to be embraced by our sisterhood, to be embraced by the Women's League as I'm trying to learn Judaism and to learn Hebrew. And I've come to love it. So that's why I'm here now. And by the way, Judith has also helped me, and we studied together, and has helped me tremendously in learning Hebrew.
Thank you. Question 2, and I hope it's all right. I'm not going to respond to what individual panelists say, because you're all saying really, really interesting things. And I don't want to take away time from our audience being able to listen and participate afterwards. So question number 2, we'll start with Edith and Jerilynn this time. 61% of the respondents in the study expressed their Jewishness in practices that allowed them to honor their racial and ethnic identities. They found ways to integrate customs and traditions from various aspects of their racial, ethnic, and religious heritages with their Jewish identity and practice. Have you been able to do that? And what or who influenced or mentored you, if it's relevant to our discussion? We started with Edith before. Let's do Jerilynn, because you're already unmuted.
Okay, well, I think, like I said, I really started attending services during COVID, and although she identifies as she's one of our leaders in sisterhood, and I'm going to mention her name, Linda Eisenberg, wanted to expand my opportunity to meet Jews of color, Jews of hues. So she provided an opportunity for me to meet one of the other congregants, Jelly, and for me to have Passover online with the Jews of color. And I was like, this is kind of cool, okay? Because we were spread out. And I was like, the other thing is, yes, there are people who look like me. And I was embraced. I had some of the cultural aspects of which I'm accustomed to for me included with Judaism, the Jewish aspect, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me. And then as I'm growing and learning more, I can see where certain aspects, because my family is comprised of a lot of hues, and my family, as one of my friends says. So, you know, being able to incorporate and to be able to see or envision how to incorporate my Judaism in different family activities as well.
Okay, thank you. Edith?
I would like to hear the question again.
Sure.
Please.
61% of the respondents in the study expressed their Jewishness in practices that allow them to honor their racial and ethnic identities. They found ways to integrate customs and traditions from various aspects of their racial, ethnic, and religious heritages with their Jewish identity and practice. Have you been able to integrate those various aspects? And was there anyone who influenced or mentored you, if that is relevant?
I think the answer to that is that we have a small group of women in the Washington, Maryland area that would at times travel together. And so we have attended conventions with Jews of color in New York and Philadelphia. And well, to start naming is a big mistake because of other places too, but there are definitely conferences and conventions that we have been able to participate in with Jews of color.
Okay, thank you. Rabbi and Cantor, same question, but with a slightly different twist. You might want to discuss this from a personal aspect in terms of your own life experience, or perhaps you might want to discuss it with what you've observed with the congregation or groups of people that you work with or mentor, like Rabbi does with the school. Rabbi, would you like to start first?
What is the slight twist in the question again?
So I'm really asking if you are have found either with the students you work with or with yourself, being able to integrate your background as a Filipina and as a Jew and as an American. You know, let's not forget that part as well. And have you found ways to integrate customs and traditions from the various parts of your background? And was there anyone who mentored you, or maybe, and if maybe you don't, if you yourself, maybe there is someone that you have worked with that you can not share the name, but you've seen that happen.
The circles that I've been in were so before rabbinical school, and then after, like now that I'm working in a kahila, in a community, they were different. But what was similar about them was they had a lot of focus on mastery of the text, at least, you know, Hebrew facility and all that, right? The only person who mentored me before was because I started off as a musician with my husband. We were raising our kids. I was a performer, theater, dance in New York City, and so that was, my husband was a music director. So it was something we could give to the community. Mm. But when I expressed desire to learn, I was actually told things like, "Oh, that really should be in the hands of the right people." Right? So, but came along a young rabbinical student who had been a teenage a teen volunteer who worked with the little guys, like really like with the toddlers. So when she went to rabbinical school and I was there, and she started to bringing me into Lane. But from the top, it would be like, you could be a really good reader, but you are a B reader. You could be an A+ reader. But you and I as teachers, you know what you do? You take that person and you bring them to where they can learn. That step never happened. But as a performer, I know that there are things that you can learn, right? This mystery was shrouded in mystery. Like I was wonderful as a convert. I was wonderful as somebody who brought back my husband into mainstream Judaism. But when I wanted to learn, the doors were shut. Doors kept shutting. Until a kid that had been in my, some of my circles that I taught, decided to go to a day school for high school. I said to myself, if Sophie has the guts to learn and start as a teenager and go through all of that awkwardness, well, by golly, I'm going. So that's when really I said to I broached the subject. I wanted to go to rabbinical school and let's see what doors open. But that was my experience. There was no holding your hand. It would be like, that belongs to certain people. Thank you.
Thank you. Cantor?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm approaching the question correctly, but I'll share what I understand the question to be. I have taken both of my identities, both being a Latinx and being a Jewish American. To be honest, I don't know that really applies because we all, I shouldn't say we all. That's certainly not a good place to start. But my Latin identity and my Jewish identity are very part of who I am, and so I've infused that in my life more as an adult. Because I'm more aware of how to integrate those things into my life, especially now with a young family. I have a almost 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So it's for me more apparent in bringing these customs that I knew growing up to then share them with my family, my children, and my husband, who happens to also be a Jew by choice. So Mira has heard this before, but my children's names, my sons both have Hebrew first names and Spanish middle names to create that connection of who they are. I use Ladino and Sephardic tunes in my service when I daven. I infuse Sephardic rituals in my Sidarim, in my ritual, and just in ritual, Passover being a huge one, eating kitniot, rice and beans. That is who I am through and through. And I never, especially with my husband, when we had conversations about how we wanted to create a family and a life for ourselves, that was one thing. He's like, oh yeah, we're eating kitniot. That's just the deal. And growing up in a very Ashkenazi, normative Jewish American culture, it took me a while to kind of get into that, but it is very much a part of who we are for obvious reasons. And foods. I think food is a really big part of how we can integrate multiple cultures. Something that I try to do every year because I love baking is making different types of hamantaschen. So my family, as was mentioned, is from Venezuela. My parents are from Venezuela in South America. And so one of our biggest, most delicious foods that we have is something called a tequeño. It is not a mozzarella stick. I'm just going to put that out there right now. It is a way better version of a cheese stick. It has a special kind of dough, a special kind of cheese. But I infuse now from a tequeño, which is, like I said, a stick, into a hamantaschen. So trying to infuse parts of who I am into my everyday Jewish life. Food is the easiest because that's how Jews connect, right? We love food. do everything that we can to infuse it. So, and then one little piece is my mentor, one of my mentors. I had 3 amazing cantors, 2 of blessed memory, who was from Argentina. And he gave me the insight that, yes, I can fuse these 2 things together. And yes, it's a really beautiful thing to share with the world what that means, but you have to discover it for yourself. And it's still a journey that I'm embarking on, but I give a lot of credit to him for bringing me into that world and showing me that there are Jews, Latinx Jews in different parts of the world outside of the United States. That's a really important point to make.
You've all really made a lot of really important points. I agree. Thank you. So question number 3, and this one's kind of open to everyone can respond or not. You pick and choose. The study indicates that 80% of respondents to the study experienced discrimination in mainstream Jewish settings. A few of the many forms identified include challenges to their Jewish identities, and Vivian mentioned that about going into a synagogue and being asked about, why you're there, or having things explained to you, microaggressions, and plain racism. There was I had a whole long list, but we tried to keep it relatively short here. Other than perhaps a single isolated incident, have you experienced or witnessed that happening systemically? And what can we all do together to dismantle those barriers? So have you experienced or seen discrimination going on? And is there something we can do to try to change that? Any volunteers?
Well, I will go there. I've given that a lot of thought. Personally, it has been very easy for me. In fact, my current rabbi allowed me to speak on this topic. So I'm thinking Kol Shalom is a little ahead of itself, because he allowed me to speak on the topic of just the racial difference. And what I said at the time was that my color arrives before I do. Before I get to the location, my color has already announced that I'm on my way. So knowing this, I think we walk around with feelings about it. It's not something that's a surprise to us when these little incidents happen. And while I have escaped, I cannot forget that some of my best friends have experienced it in their locations, which are within our state, and have been very seriously wounded by the insulting things that sound innocent, like perhaps identifying the clothing you have on. You're dressed so well, or things like that. It can happen. And as I'm very pleased that I can say that I have not felt it, but I don't know, did we, and I say we because when in moving into this synagogue, I had a very good friend with me. And so I always think of it as we together. But did anybody leave because we were there? We don't know. I don't know. And if it happened, it was never shared with me. So while my experience has been very pleasurable and inviting, I know that I'm just a breath away from some other extreme, because it's all around us. I mean, we can't escape it.
I appreciate your honesty. And I could see on the screen some other heads nodding, that maybe some of those same kinds of experiences have been witnessed. Anybody else would like to respond to this?
Sure, I'll respond on a couple of levels. Because I was asked by our international president to serve on this inclusion committee, you know, I'm new. I really didn't know a whole lot of people, so it afforded me, especially with the guidance and help of my first Hebrew teacher, Sharon Katz, who introduced me to, I would say, the first 3 people that I met from other places of Jews of color, so I could talk to them and get an idea of their experiences that they were dealing with. And then from there, it expanded across the country. So although, you know, it was a good opportunity for me to hear and to see things from the entry level, and to hear what other people experience. So that was good. So I could come back and be mindful of that while we're trying to gather some information on what we should do with this inclusion committee. But the other thing is sometimes microaggressions come into play. I really, you know, I am not a mother, I'm not a grandmother, but I'm a heck of an auntie, okay? And I have little ones in the family. And I like to sing and do different things with them. So I went to our preschool program. I signed up for it. You have to sign up before you get the Zoom address, all right? And they'll send it to you. But when I went into that space, it was just a teacher and myself. She continued to ask me why I was there. And I explained what I'd like to know. What do you teach young children? You know, I'd like to be able to do that with my grandnephew and nieces. And she kept doing that until ultimately I said, it's probably best for me to leave. Just to speed that along, after, you know, going back and letting them know what happened, I had someone to call me apologetic, but then I had to realize that we all could continuously learn to expand our understanding and horizons. And although you might have a PhD and MD or whatever other things, we still have to learn about our differences and to respect those differences. But also, you know, some of the microaggressions, I think that's partly because I'm also a woman. All right, don't get it twisted, don't get it wrong. I'm going to speak up. I probably have done some things as a man that you've never done, okay? But I had to really bite the inside of my cheeks when I had a white male to tell me how he thought I should speak or what I should have said. And I backed it down, okay? Because I'm like, you just don't know, bro, man. You just don't know. All right. And those are the kinds of things that sometimes you have to pick your battles on, okay? But I have to say, I've been embraced by the community with loving arms from all over the place. And that helps to sustain me. I can talk candidly with my sisterhood members as well as my friends. And that is what I love about it, because sometimes you don't get that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call before I go on. Cantor?
Yeah, I wanted to just respond to Edith. As soon as you mentioned my color arrives before I do, man, that is one powerful statement and one that I connect with strongly. So I thank you for bringing that to our attention, because to me, that was the first thing that also came to mind. You know, I have my appearance. Like I said, I've been in a synagogue since I was 3, and I've only known Judaism just as I've grown up. But what I have unfortunately noticed as well is how I look and how I'm different. It gets pointed out as something that is, for lack of a better word, fetishized almost. Oh, where are you really from? Where, you know, give me your whole story so that I can validate who you are. And while I am always happy to share my story, I mean, I've been doing that since, you know, whenever we had, as in elementary school, I loved sharing that my family was from South America. I had pride in that. I never really understood why it was always something that had to be explained whenever I came into a room. And so after so many patterns of that, I realized what was happening, because I also have been embraced in a lot of Jewish spaces for who I am. And I appreciate the love that I get within my congregation. And my third layer, not only being a woman, like Jerilynn said, but also being, I guess, what I hear a lot of as a youngster. So the ageism kind of comes into play, as well as being a woman, as well as being a person of color. So there are a lot of different elements to that, but I really am so thankful to both Edith and Jerilynn for bringing these points across, because it happens. It does.
Well, I thank you all for bringing these points up. I agree. In relation to this last question, the study brings up another challenge for Jews of color: finding a community that feels like home. Some Jews of color gravitate and flourish in settings where other Jews of color gather separately, almost like a special interest group. Would anyone like to comment? And again, this is something either all of you or one of you, whatever works. Any volunteers?
So let me address that, at least from my own experience. Beginning with, for example, understanding how to navigate whether you can enter a building or not, right? You want to go and daven, you want to be able to enter the building. So we are told, for example, when you go to a synagogue in South America or in Europe, email before, they're going to ask you probably your passport, all of those details. So what I do now is that if I am going to bring JOCs into a space, I will go to the top of whoever I can speak to, and I will say, we are 3 Asian Americans coming in, and we are 6 or 3 African Americans showing up for this event. And some people get really flustered, and I give them the names, because I say to avoid awkwardness, right? Because I am very protective of exposing JOCs to that kind of humiliation, right? So I just think, oh, I'm going to another country, and do all of that. And believe me, it works. It somehow works. They're alerted. They know we're coming. Let's say I'm invited to speak somewhere. Then I actually have to say, I just want you to know that I present as an Asian American person.
Thank you.
And that, all the microaggressions, to talk about all of it, it's just like, it's like, pulling out the wounds and the thorns. But that's how I manage for myself and my other people. And yes, we need separate JOC spaces, so that when we come to these collective spaces, we are all there. We have been nurtured somewhere else, and we don't expect one place to be, what I say, like, you don't expect this one person to be your father, your boyfriend, your grandpa, your best friend, your dearest and nearest. But we allow people for the many ways they have to be.
So I'd like to move from that, because that's a good segue. Jerilynn, you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
Just real quick, and some of the people that I talked to, and it saddens me that they've been attending services for a long time in their synagogues, and still are challenged sometimes or feel separated. Don't let people feel separate. Just speak to people. Open your mouth. Hello. You don't have to engage a lot, but include people. And that saddens me that people have been Jewish and attend the service, know the services in and out, unlike me, okay? And that they still feel alone, that they are gathered with, like kids at the lunch table. The Blacks are together, this is together. And people should not feel that way, even though there might be comfort in feeling just being with someone who's like you. So
Thank you. I'm going to move on because, believe it or not, it's already 20 to 9. And I'd like us to be able to look at the other 2 questions. So the first question, number 4, is Jews of color are underrepresented in leadership in mainstream Jewish organizations of all kinds. Further, about 2/3 of the survey respondents said that American Jewish leaders were doing a poor job of addressing racism in the American Jewish community. First, I would like to ask the Rabbi and Cantor if they would share their thoughts about making change happen to erase the barriers to full inclusion at all levels of the Jewish community. And then we're going to ask Edith and Jerilynn to answer it also. If you can't or you don't want to, of course, you can always pass. But what could we do? We won't challenge the survey part that says that leadership is underrepresented and that we're not doing enough. If it's all right with you, we're going to accept that that's, for at least with this survey, that's the fact. What can we do to change it? All right. And certainly listening to your last answer, it sounds like we have a lot of things to change. Rabbi, would you like to go first? Because I didn't mean to cut you off.
Number 1, now you can see some JOCs in some spaces, right? In like one person here, one person there, one person there. And there are fellowships, right? There are fellowships being offered for leadership and for training. That did not happen in all, at least I would say the last 20 years that I've been, actively in Jewish community. That did not happen without some of JOCs just going out there by themselves, starting their own nonprofits. Yabila McCoy was one of our first leaders, right? Organizing creating an organization that's for that goes into the study of diversity, inclusion, but also addressing the needs of Jewish women of color, for example. April Baskin, starting her own thing. Gina Green, all of these different leaders, right? So when they started their own nonprofit, suddenly the world was like, whoa. And then what happened really was George Floyd was murdered. And then suddenly we had a network of people who had been trained by Yabila McCoy, in these concentric circles, and suddenly we were in demand. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it happened, it's starting to happen because people started creating their own. Jared Jackson, Jews in All Hues, right, created his own nonprofit. It was not given to us on a silver platter.
Okay, thank you. Cantor, and for those of us who are listening, again, remember, these are individual opinions, and we're asking because we need to get ideas and viewpoints from all directions. And you have had experiences, and that, I think, helps us to, based on your experiences, to give us some ideas of what are some things we could do to change things. Cantor?
So I'll use a most recent example, the murder of George Floyd. When that occurred, and there were protests and rallies and different things happening all over the country and the world, really, I took upon myself, and honestly, I was a little timid about standing up and speaking out with my community. Not that I felt that I was going to be verbally harmed or put in an uncomfortable situation, but that I had never really spoken truth to power in this setting before. And when I started doing so, simple things, changing my background, to say Black Lives Matter, to speak the truths that needed to be verbally, needed to be said, using poems and readings that highlighted the situation and the urgency of the moment. People started asking me questions that, whether for better or for worse, they needed to hear from my own perspective. And I certainly, like you were saying, like, it was my personal opinions, but I felt that this was the time for me to finally really speak up about how I feel as somebody who is a JOC, a Jew of color. I know there's somebody who was asking what that term was. And I was asked the same question, and I struggle with this question because to some degree, I feel that, and I can't speak for all Jews of color, but like we, to some regard, are happy to extend our own knowledge to a point. It is as simple as going on Google and typing, what is Black Lives Matter? What are Jews of color? I mean, it's forget the internet. If you're a person who loves to go to the library, check out a book. I don't mean that in any harmful way. I really do mean it in the truest and honest sense, because what we need to learn, and when we're learning about any culture, is educating ourselves. And I start small.
Are there things that we within the Jewish community, though, could be doing to change representation in the leadership? Are there things we could be doing?
Why would somebody want to be in a leadership position? That's the question, right? That would preclude that person feels they're embraced by the community, so that they would offer their free time, for the betterment of the community.
I think that there has to be. I always say that you could pick up a book, and I agree with that, and that's what I suggested. Start by picking up the book, but you also have to have conversations. You have to have brave conversations, not in attacking each other, but trying to come to an understanding about some things. Go beyond the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic way of looking at things. I hate to say that, but you have to go beyond that as well to understand other customs, other ways. Include different people in your conversations, not just, but within your lives. You'll be surprised how much better the food will taste if you have a variety at the plate, okay? It really makes it much more interesting. Go out, and there's so many opportunities, and this is what I try to say. I was so pleasant, and I get excited. I'm a little excited, I'm sorry. I was pleasantly surprised to see the number of scholarships, the number of financial support to be able for some of these programs. Take advantage of them. Don't go to the same well of folks that look just like you to explain something they don't understand and expect a difference. Sometimes you have to take a risk in order to grow. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. Okay.
Well done. I'm hearing from everyone that it can influence what I'm about to say, but mentioning when Cantor mentioned the Black Lives Matter, I did a little of my own research today and went back into the first time that racial injustice was discussed in the same forum, and it's been over a year ago. that the Women's League had that on. And I listened to those speakers, and I don't want to get into mentioning names because I probably will get it confused. But one of them really impressed me because she said that, and I'm using her gender, but a couple of people impressed me. But what I got out of it was that we, and these are my own words, we are tripped up with some of the things that we're carrying around within us. For instance, the Black Lives Matter term. Well, that carries belief. A lot of people believe that it's connected with something that they cannot accept, and it swings back and forth. Blacks have their issues. The buzzword for them is slavery. Don't go there. So you don't go there with them, and you don't mention Israel with the Jews. And we have these sensitivities, and the only way to overcome that, I believe, is what was mentioned in that earlier recording, is to build relationships. We have to start by knowing each other. And if we know each other, then we're not so quick to fire our missile if somebody kind of says something that we might not agree with. We can talk it out. But I don't think we have that. I don't think we're at that point yet. And I will say that there's an amazing thing going on with Jews of color. You know, they're doing the same things that are happening with the with any other organization. They're practicing the same thing. I mentioned the synagogue in Philadelphia. It's there are a few other races in there, but it's majority Black, and the little children, and from a very young age, they're all speaking Hebrew. I mean, it's there. It's been there. It didn't happen overnight.
Ladies, I hate to cut anybody off because what you have been saying has been really important and very meaningful. And I'd like to speak for Vivian and myself when I say I thank you. We have one last question because we're really running out of time. And I would like to only give you 1 minute instead of the 2.5 or 3 or a little bit more. And that is based on, there are a lot of things we've talked about. And I realize there are many more questions are floating around in my head than answers. And I'm going to guess that's true for everyone. But having said that, is there any one thing that you feel we haven't touched on that is really important for our audience to hear? And if there is, delighted to have you speak it. Give you 1 minute, and I will literally at 45 seconds wave my hand. But I don't want to not give you that opportunity.
I won't need the time limit. Basically, while I was thinking about this, my mind was on what happened to spirituality, where it seems like we are stepping away from that so that we can grip these social issues. And I think spirituality is the necessary component to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm going to say keep learning, keep talking, keep experiencing, go out of your comfort zone. If you need to talk to me, you know how to reach me one way or the other. And that's, I think communication is the key. And I believe that this community, I am loving Women's League because they're taking risks. They're going out there, they're doing some things. Even if you stumble when you're climbing to reach your goal, you may stumble, but you can still get there. And the only way to do it is to put out the effort and put it out there and do the work. Call me.
I will set this
Thank
weekend
you.
up this year. You guys will think.
Anybody else?
If there's an issue in your city, right, in your town, go out and partner with a church or with another group of people, right? So because oftentimes when they are in our building, the other is inside the building. It's so easy to not really see them. They're there, but I'm sort of not seeing. But when it's an issue that hits your town, it hits everybody. And you will have differences. Come back to the table. Come back to the table, because you are invested in your town together. And that way we start to learn how to be with each other. Then we will be better with each other inside the house.
Thank you.
And now I'll just add very quick. Reaching out, absolutely, but going out and going into the experiences. Go to the Greek festival, go to a musical concert series that's outside of what you normally go to. Try to find experiences that appeal to you, but try to find different branches of the community that you otherwise wouldn't go, because that starts the foundation, because you have a commonality, whether that's music, whether that's theology, spirituality. There are a lot of different ways in which you can engage, but try to engage outside of what your norm is.
Thank you. I would like to thank Vivian, and I would like to thank all of our panelists for your willingness to participate and for your preparation and your wonderful discussion tonight. We really appreciate it. We've learned a lot. I'm going to say to you that the problem we're going to run into right now is we've cut into our question and answer time. And Vivian, do you want to still ask?
I think we should just do it. If we go 5 minutes over, I hope people will forgive us. This is just too fantastic a program. I've just been so moved and blown away by these topics. And some of it has given me like a new way of looking at things, really, I must say so. So let me run by you a couple of very good audience questions. Let's say in your synagogue or another Jewish setting, you want to ask someone about their background. Is there a respectful way of doing that? How would you suggest? And the other part of that question is, today, because of security issues and COVID issues, people are asked questions at the door, questions upon entry. Is that a problem? Do you feel that also creates some kind of bad situation, or misunderstood situation? So either aspect of that, is there a respectful way to ask people questions if you're a curious person? You touched on some of that, but any thoughts?
Share something about yourself. Think about it like you're in a cocktail party, right? You don't have to stay with them for like 20, 30 minutes. Say something about yourself. That's an opening, because what happens often is like they'll ask about us and they will keep probing. And then what happens after that? The time is over. Oh, they walk away. And it's like rummaging through, like, when you're looking in a store, for clothing, you take it out, and then you walk away. So that's really hurtful. So share something about yourself first.
Okay, that's certainly good manners in any situation. Yeah, you're right. Anyone else?
The people that I mentioned that had objections to questions, they were talking about things like, are you Jewish? what are you doing here? Was your mother Jewish? Where are you coming from? That kind of thing. And that's rude for anyone. I have exchanged my background with many people in my synagogue because they're polite about it. They just ask, well, they're very gentle in the way they ask, how did you decide to do this? It's the way it's asked.
Okay.
I'm gonna err on the side of caution these days. It just gives me, as a retired firefighter and paramedic and having served in that community, I'm still going to err on the side of caution when it comes to if you have training for your synagogues on how to deal with different people that may come in. Just don't assume it is a person that looks like this particular. It could be someone who you may not suspect might be wanting to cause harm. But we do have certain questions that we should all be aware of what's going on, and not just in our communities. I'm so saddened about the gun violence in this country, and yet sometimes in the synagogues we don't talk about the terrorism that is occurring right here next door to us. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. We'll go to Ukraine because we can empathize with them. I understand that. But also, I'm hurting when I see people in this country as well. So we need to include that in our discussions, in our prayers, in our thoughts, in our concerns. But there is, if you've not had training for your synagogue, you should have people constantly been upgraded on the correct or some of the techniques to try to ascertain and to try to get an idea. I think what happened at the synagogue not too long ago was amazing with that particular rabbi and trying to engage this person who came to do harm. So,
okay, I could go on. There were other people who sent me a couple of good questions. I'm not going to ask them right now because I think in one way or another you touched on some of that, and you have really all been so giving of yourselves. I really do appreciate it. I want to give a chance to Fran to, by the way, if you saw in the chat box, I put 2 resources of, literature, books by and about Jews of color from different backgrounds. So take a look. I also want to give Fran a chance to speak about an initiative of Women's League. People are asking about it. And then after that, we'll turn to Rabbi Wolins Fields for a few words.
Thanks, Vivian. I'm going to shorten what I was going to say because I know about the time. And some of you may be aware that last summer, the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs invited Women's League to participate in a joint committee to create an inclusion action guide. We gladly accepted, and as chair of Mishpacha, I was offered the opportunity to participate. And that's where I had the privilege to meet Jerilynn. We both work on it together, and at least one of our other members I know is on it, Ariana Burrows. I don't know if Karen Weiner, who is the Women's League co-chair, is on or not, but there's and Nancy Goldberg, who's also on the call. Anyways, the point of it was to create a guide that can be used with underserved communities. And the ones that we chose were individuals with mental and/or physical health challenges, Jews of color, LGBTQIA plus individuals, and non-traditional family status. The purpose of the guide is to provide synagogue sisterhood affiliates, clubs, other organizations, resources of ideas, activities, training, and education to support everyone in doing in doing these programs or beginning a inclusion committee in your synagogue or your sisterhood. We have a speakers bureau with volunteers who are willing to meet with your group, discuss the benefits of the guide and how to use it, and what additional services we offer. And I'm kind of trying to summarize some of what I have down. But the bottom line is we don't want to just talk the talk. We want to walk the walk, and we want to walk it with all of you. So at this point, the Inclusion Action Guide is almost ready for publication. It should be coming out relatively soon. And if you want additional information about it, you can contact Karen Weiner, who is the Women's League co-chair of this joint committee. You can contact Jerilynn, you can contact myself, and we will be happy to answer any questions or send you to the right person to be able to sign up to have someone come out and speak. But we'll be doing a lot of publicity this fall. I'm going to thank you for everyone who has attended, and I'm going to turn this over to Rabbi Ellen, and then we'll return back to Vivian and say goodnight and apologize for keeping you so much later than we had intended. And we really appreciate our speakers who joined us tonight and were so honest and open with us. Thank you. And Vivian or Rabbi Ellen, would you like to come on?
Yes. Wonderful to see everybody, and thank you so much to our speakers this evening. You were so inspirational and so intelligent. It's just like we all sit together, especially our little Makom B'Yachad, it's not so little, but our Makom B'Yachad community. And Edith and Jerilynn are with us nearly every time, and you have such an amazing background and information, and just like, it was just a wonderful evening. And I got to see Rabbi Mira from afar today when I was sitting at ordination, and she presented one of our new colleagues, Kendall, with his talit. And I'm sorry I didn't get to see you there, but I was like, she has the same thing I have this evening, but I think a shorter commute. So it's just wonderful that you've all been with us, and we have a name and a face to put together, that we can create a holy community of everybody. What Edith said before was about the spirituality of all of it. That's what we come to in Parshat Bahar this week. Parshat Bahar talks about how we should create holiness in our communities, like Kedusha. The Parsha talks about, the Torah reading talks about the pursuit of holiness through laws of land tenure, sabbaticals, indenture, indebtedness. And then after, they talk about the transfer of land. In Leviticus chapter 25, verse 14, it says, when you sell property or buy any from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. So they're talking about land, and then that you shouldn't wrong one another, but you should fear God, for I am your Lord. Lo tanu is the term that they use. So don't harm. And that's what it's all about, of creating holiness within our communities and not hurting each other. To learn about each other is how we can create sacred communities. Rashi, the commentary, says that the lo tanu, do not harm, has to do with commercial wrongs. In the Talmud, lo tanu is about injuring someone with words. And we shouldn't take advantage of anybody with words. As we were just learning and hearing, communication is the key to all of it. To create the holiness of community is to create a community where we can speak to each other, to show respect to each other, to show decency and inclusion to each other, and to realize one of the greatest sayings in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Ancestors, is, I'll say it in Hebrew and then translate, Lo tistakel b'kankan ela ma sheyesh bo. Don't judge, basically, don't judge a book by its cover. Edith, I think it was Edith, said that when she walks in, people see her color first. We can't judge by the color, but we need to see that we're all here together. We're all Jews, and we should all appreciate each other as well and learn about each other and truly create that Kedusha, that holiness in our community. And I hope that this evening is just one way that we will continue to create a holy community within our sisterhood of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. So thank you to all of you for being with us, especially our panelists, to Fran and Vivian to create this program, and to my workmate, Karen, who's here with us this evening as well. Toda Rabba and Shabbat Shalom, and I turn it over to you again.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And
thank you.
Each one of you has moved us and inspired us to be more, even ever more thoughtful and smarter about all of these, integrating all these issues. So with that, I think Fran and I wish you a good night and good springtime, and good Shavuos is our next holiday. And Fran, thank you all for participating, and especially our wonderful panelists. And I hope we become friends and stay in touch. I feel like I know you after this evening. Fran?
Everything that Vivian said and the rabbi, I feel like it's hard to come up with new ways to say it, except that what you said was very inspiring and motivating for me to do more and to be more and to think about all the things that you have talked about and how can we use that and bring it back to our sisterhoods and to our synagogues and our communities. So appreciate all of you who participated, our panelists, and everything you were willing to share with us. And hopefully we are able to use that and direct it in positive ways that in our communities and with ourselves. And I thank you. And thank you to Karen and Rabbi, and again, to everyone who attended. I feel hope that maybe we can do something and make a change and be that change that we clearly need to be. So thank you.
Okay, with that, I think it's a wrap. I hope we all meet again. Thank you.